Whoa, whoa, slow down there. This is kind of a long video. You should pace yourself. Pacing is one of those crucial yet somewhat nebulous elements of storytelling. Especially with a longer work like a novel or a series of novels, properly proportioning the pacing at particular points in the plot is paramount to perfecting the enjoyment of the reader. Pacing is the speed at which a reader is pulled through the story. Or said another way, it's the intensity at which events and information are delivered to the reader. Scenes with lots of action and events happening, or with quick, pithy dialogue, or with revelations happening every second sentence are said to be fast-paced, whereas scenes with more introspection or more reflective tones are said to be slower-paced. There's no best pace for a story to move at. An action thriller will likely do well to be quickly paced, whereas a more toned-down, character-driven romance might want to be slower paced. When correctly matched with the events of the story, pacing isn't really something you notice. It just sort of feels right. It's only when the pacing doesn't match when you start to notice problems. Pacing is a big subject, so I'm going to be tackling it over the course of several videos. Next week, we'll talk about how specific devices like dialogue or introspection affect pacing and ways to use them to either speed up or slow down your pacing. At some point, we'll also probably have a discussion around changes in pacing, how and when you should speed things up and slow them down. I don't know exactly what we'll cover in the subsequent videos. We'll see how it goes. I don't want to push the information out too fast or too slowly. Today, though, we're going to be talking about the difference between scene and plot level pacing, also called micro and macro level pacing. Pacing can apply either to the events of the story as a whole and how they unfold, or to the speed at which each individual scene moves. As the names imply, scene-level pacing is the pacing of events in a given scene or chapter, whereas plot-level or macro-level pacing is how events unfold over the course of the entire story. If you break an individual scene down to its beginning, middle, and end, and all the events, revelation, and actions that take place over the course of that scene, how fast you deliver all that information determines how fast the pacing of that scene will be. At the plot level, it's more a case of breaking down the major plot points, twists, the climax, etc., and how fast you move through each of those will determine the overall plot or macro pacing. Scene level pacing is also affected by how you write the scene. We'll get into this more next week, but if you write with a lot of short sentences or quick back and forth dialogue, that will work to speed up the pacing of an individual scene. Longer sentences, more interruption between dialogue, and just more kind of introspection in general will tend to slow down the pacing of that scene. Now, it's important to remember here that you still need to move the scene along by having meaningful events take place throughout. If you have writing that feels fast-paced, but the scene isn't actually moving anywhere, then that's a problem. If you've ever read a story that feels kind of tiring and you're not sure why, this is usually the problem. Fast-paced scenes require a lot more energy to read, there's more happening, and it takes more effort to keep up with it all. If the reader isn't getting anything for that effort, if the events of the scene or the overall plot aren't flowing along with the action, then the story is going to feel tiring. The same thing applies at the plot or macro level. Say your story is a travel log. You have characters on a long journey from point A to point E, and they're going to be going through points B, C, and D. Even if the individual scenes between point A and point B feel fast-paced, if it takes the entire story before you make any real progress towards point B, and thus any progress towards the ultimate goal, then the overall pacing is going to feel quite slow and the story is going to be exhausting to read. Pacing is not just about how fast the story feels, but how fast the story is actually happening. This brings up another element of pacing that applies mostly at the plot level, but also at the scene level. And that's how anxious the reader is to keep turning the page. This is the kind of emotional response we think of when we think of fast-paced stories, the edge of your seat, can't put it down type of stories. These types of plots rely a lot on cliffhangers or rapid-fire revelations that always give the characters something new to deal with and something new that the reader wants to figure out. This type of pacing doesn't necessarily have to be driven by scenes that are themselves very quickly paced. You don't necessarily need something exploding in every scene to create this type of effect, although I would say most stories that would be described as being fast-paced also make use of very fast scene-level pacing. Still though, even slower, deliberative scenes, if they reveal something interesting or lead to some sort of cliffhanger, can still work to quicken the plot-level pacing and pull a reader through the story without necessarily having scenes that are themselves very fast-paced. A story can have fairly leisurely type scenes and still be fast-paced if the major events of the plot are happening with enough rapidity. That is a bit of a trickier way to do it, and I'm not sure that everyone would still consider those stories fast-paced though. In any event, understanding the difference between scene-level pacing and plot-level pacing is important for your overall pacing of the story to be right. We'll see how this all comes together next week when we delve deeper into how writing affects the pacing of individual scenes. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.